Chapter 3. An Eerie Trail. "Don't lose sight of Joe. Keep both beams trained on him." With these words, Frank Hardy thrust his flashlight into Chet Morton's hands, and then he plunged into the boiling torrent himself. The freezing water crashed against his hips with the force of a football tackler. Joe, apparently unconscious, already had been carried several feet downstream. Cautiously, Frank inched across, groping for footholds on the treacherous bottom. Better to move slowly than to risk a fall now, he thought. In a moment, guided by Chet's flashlights, Frank reached his brother. He was lying unconscious against a rock, his head just out of the reach of the water. Frank braced his feet carefully and stooped. In a moment he straightened up, with Joe's limp form held firmly across his shoulders in a fireman's carry. "Over here, Frank!" Chet called anxiously, lighting the way. Frank lurched through the raging water to the bank, where Chet helped lower Joe carefully and gently to the ground. Is he breathing?" gulped Chet, who was pulling off his shirt to use as a towel. "He'll be all right. Nasty cut on his head, that's all," Frank answered tersely. He indicated a bloody mark on Joe's temple. Then he swiftly stripped off his brother's soaking clothes. Meanwhile, Chet rubbed Joe's body briskly with the big woolen shirt. In a moment Joe was blinking against the glare of their flashlights and grinning weakly into their anxious faces. "Say, take that light out of a fellow's face," he protested feebly. "And what have you two done with my clothes?" Chet took charge. "Never mind your clothes. Just put that shirt on and keep yourself warm. You Hardys are going straight back to the cabin to dry out by the stove. Whoever was doing that screaming down here can wait until tomorrow." There was no more screaming during the night, and in the morning the sunshine had already flooded the little clearing before any sign of activity was to be seen around the captain's cabin. Inside, Frank and Joe were still sleeping soundly. From the kitchen came the clink and rattle of dishes and the unmistakable aroma of pancakes and sausages. "Clang, clang!" Chet Morgan appeared in the doorway, pounding on a big metal pan with a big wooden spoon. "Breakfast, gang! Up and at 'em! It's almost 10 o'clock. On the floor, 2 khaki sleeping bags stirred, and 2 heads popped into view. "Oh, my aching head," Joe moaned as he sat up. "Captain Maguire hasn't shown up, has he, Chet?" "Ain't nobody here but us pancakes," the stout boy replied cheerfully as he re-entered the kitchen. "And if you two don't get a move on, there won't be any of us pancakes or sausages left for long either." Chet's threat was enough for the Hardys. They were ravenous after their exertions of the night before, and they wasted no time getting to the breakfast table. In half an hour the trio, refreshed, were ready for a thorough search of Black Hollow. Before starting, Frank slung the leather case containing his powerful binoculars around his neck. "I'm taking these just in case." Frank led the way down the steep, twisting path while Joe brought up the rear. Once they were under the huge, closely growing trees, very little of the bright sunlight filtered down to them. The dark, somber evergreens made it almost impenetrable, this umbrella over their heads. All the time they kept looking for signs of Captain Maguire. "It's easy to figure how this place got the name of Black Hollow," Joe remarked. The absence of wind in the well-protected valley made for an unnatural stillness. Not a leaf stirred. Furthermore, no small animals seemed to be moving. Joe's voice had a peculiar loudness that made all 3 a bit uneasy. "Wait!" Chet Morton halted abruptly. "What's that?" All 3 listened intensely. At the same time, their eyes surveyed the surrounding woods. "Just the call of a crow," Joe said sheepishly. "Must be a mile away at least." When the trekkers reached the rushing torrent, Joe unslung a coil of stout manila rope from his shoulder. Working rapidly, the brothers rigged a lifeline for future passages by securing one end of the rope to a stout tree on the bank. Once across, the search party continued their descent. Soon the sound of the turbulent stream was left behind. The eerie silence again surrounded them. Once more Chet stopped. "Listen." "What now?" asked Joe with some impatience. "I thought I heard something rustling." "For Pete's sake," Joe grinned at Chet. "It's your pant legs rubbing against each other. Come on, we'll never get to the bottom of this hollow." The trio resumed its way down the trail. "Hold it." There was a tense note in Frank's voice. "Hear anything?" Chet demanded eagerly. Warily, the youth's alert eyes scanned the trail behind them. "I just can't shake this queer feeling that somebody or something is following us." "Must be stopping every time we do," muttered Chet. "I can't hear a thing." After switching positions, the boys continued down the trail. Now it was Joe who scrambled forward in the lead. Frank, watching every tree and rock suspiciously, brought up the rear. At last the steep path leveled onto the floor of the hollow. Quickening his pace, Joe plunged forward, and before he knew it, his legs were caught in many vine-like brushes. Innumerable tiny prickers bit through his pants, grasped his sweater like claws, and dug into his exposed wrists and hands like fishhooks. "Ow!" he shouted, struggling frantically. "What's got me?" "You're in a briar patch," called his brother, laughing. "Simmer down and stop fighting it. Go through it slowly, take off one vine at a time." By doing this, Joe succeeded in freeing himself. Carefully, he worked his way through the patch, with Chet and Frank following. Suddenly, he stopped once more. "Frank! Chet! What's the matter? Caught again?" Grinning triumphantly, Joe turned his face to his comrades. "Maybe I did rush in here without looking, but I wasn't the only one. Take a look at this." With a flourish, he held up a piece of bright plaid material about 2 inches square. "It was clinging to this bush," he announced. "Looks like part of somebody's flannel shirt. Maybe the captain's. It hasn't been here long. It's not faded a bit by the weather." "Let's see it," called Chet, struggling forward through the briars. "Can't wait now," returned Joe as he emerged from the brushes. "Captain Maguire may be right near here." He rushed headlong down into the forest path, leaving Chet and Frank to catch up as soon as they could. Just as they, too, worked clear of the tenacious prickers, another triumphant shout came from Joe, which caused them to set off on the double. A wide, rock-strewn brook, apparently running the length of the valley, came into sight. Joe, kneeling beside it, was fishing something out of the eddying pool on the near bank. As Frank and Chet pounded up, he showed them an empty matchbook cover. It was wet, but it was still bright-colored and fairly firm. "Hasn't been here long," he commented. "It's a find, all right," Frank agreed somberly. "It may not prove that Captain Maguire passed this way, but something human did. Now let's follow the brook and keep our eyes open." The soft ground, covered with brown carpet of needle, of pine and hemlock, disclosed no footprints. But as Frank Hardy approached the large dead trunk, which had fallen directly across the path, his trained eyes picked up 2 distinct, cup-like indentations in the front of it. At the same time, something shiny just off the trail attracted Joe's attention. Reaching in among some thick vegetation beside the stream, he pulled out a pair of empty shotgun shells. "Must have been shot recently," he noted, sniffing. "I can still smell gunpowder." Meanwhile, Frank carefully placed one of his knees in each of the sunken marks in front of the fallen tree. "Whoever was here knelt in this spot and fired across the log," he concluded. "One of Captain Maguire's guns is missing. Maybe he fired the shots, but at what? "This trail is getting really hot," Joe exclaimed, starting off. The path continued to follow the bank of the brook. And suddenly Joe, in the lead, drew up to a sharp halt. "Whoop! On your guard! Prickers again! And hey, another piece of plaid flannel shirt!" "And that's not all," Frank broke in excitedly. "Look at the way these nettles have been crushed. They're all down in this one spot, as though something heavy has fallen on them." Now it was Chet's turn to make a discovery. With a yelp, the stout boy bent over to snatch up a bent metal flashlight. Fragments on the shattered lens lay on the ground nearby. "It's Captain Maguire's," declared the boy excitedly, pointing out the initials TM scratched into the barrel of the flashlight. Frank, in the meantime, had dropped down to examine the crushed nettle stalks more closely. "I'm afraid this is serious," he announced at last. "Some of these leaves are stained dark." "Blood?" queried Chet in a worried voice. The Hardys nodded. At the moment, the boys heard a slight noise just above them. Jerking their heads abruptly upward, they were startled to see a face gazing down at them from the height of a boulder on the bank. It was a strange, wild-looking, sun-browned face, framed with scraggly black hair. The fierce dark eyes glared at the watchers as the wide mouth shaped itself into a weird grimace. End of chapter 3.